Hello everyone, it is time for me to do my video for my top 10 favorite fantasy series, most of which are on this wall. And I am going to note that this is my top 10 favorite fantasy series, not what I'm trying to say are the top 10 best fantasy series. So I'm not trying to say that these are the 10 series that are have the most literary merit or the most impressive. They're my favorites. I feel like I'm not a real booktuber until I do this video, you know? Every booktuber has a top 10 favorite list, and I don't. So now I'm a real booktuber, I think. Coming in at the number 10 spot, we have The Banished Lands, which is kind of two series, but I'm combining it. So it's The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, and Of Blood and Bone by John Gwynne. Now, I wasn't sure whether this was one series or two series, but even if it's one series, Faithful and the Fallen is still 10 on this list. So it doesn't change the position of the list. So we're going to stick with it as two series. So why is this number 10 on the list? I think the number one compliment I can give to John Gwynne is these books, especially Faithful and the Fallen, have a lot of point of views, and there was not a single point of view that I get to that's disappointing. You know the feeling when you turn a page and you get to a point of view and you're like, oh, it's this point of view? That doesn't happen in this series. And you get quite a few point of views. They're very fast-paced. They're very well-paced. They're kind of very page-turnery. Really well-written action that kind of puts you in the scene. Just all around, a lot to love. Some great, emotional moments. Also very unpredictable in that John Gwynne is pretty ruthless when it comes to killing his characters. Some people, I think, get that reputation, and some people question whether they earn it. John Gwynne definitely has earned the reputation of being someone who's willing to kill his characters. And he's kind of, they're the types of stories that they have tropes that made the genre familiar, but when I read them, they remind me what I like about that trope in the first place. And yeah, wonderful series, has two great endings. Wrath, I thought was a very good ending to a series, not one of my favorite ever, and then A Time of Courage is, I think, an even better ending to the series, and caps off The Banished Lands and gets it to my number 10 spot. And for the number 9 spot, we move to slightly less good versus evil to evil versus evil. The First Law. And I'm counting all of the First Law as one series, because figuring out where the First Law trilogy would be and where Age of Madness would be, and are the standalones a trilogy? He calls them a trilogy at some point, but are they standalones? Whatever. I'm calling it one series. So I guess it'll be a 10-book series when Wisdom of Crowds come out, which will be great. So, The First Law has a lot going for it, but obviously the main thing is some of the most vivid characters that you just get so deep into their head. And I've said this before, as have many other people, no one does character voice quite like Joe Abercrombie does. Everyone just feels so distinctive. He has very kind of snappy, smart dialogue. It's just, very, very good at writing. One thing that's holding this back from being higher on this list is I'm just not the biggest Grimdark fan. My favorite characters are mostly people I can really cheer for, and there's kind of less people I can cheer for here. But everyone, it's such an amazing execution of what it's trying to do. What it's trying to do isn't exactly what I want out of a fantasy story, but even if it's not exactly what I want, it's so good that I still end up really liking it anyways. There are some things that kind of start as cons and then he turns into pros for this latest series. The plotting of the first trilogy is kind of fine, and the first book is somewhat rough, but then the plotting for the second trilogy has potentially been one of the best plotted trilogies I've read, where it's events in one part of the world are affecting events in the other. Everything kind of ties together. Really great setup and payoff. And so he started off amazing at character writing, and he's kind of elevated the other aspects of his writing. And one thing I also think, especially the Age of Madness has, is the cast of side characters, which I wasn't actually the most impressed with that for the trilogy, but he's really leveled that up. So he just writes some of the most vivid and interesting characters. And if you're a fan of character-driven grimdark fantasy and you haven't read the First Law, I don't know what you're doing. You should read it. Or maybe even if you aren't those, you should still maybe try it because of how good it is. So, coming in for the number 8 spot, we have the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, which is really the fantasy series that got me started as like an almost exclusively fantasy reader a good, 7 years ago, where I kind of read a mix of genre, and then this really got me on the epic fantasy kick that's been going ever since then, basically. And I have read series since then that I like more, but this was the one that got me in, and I have reread it a number of times, and I still absolutely love it. Just every time I get into it, I just love the story so much. It's one of the best plotted, probably the best plotted trilogy I've ever read. Where like Brandon does such an amazing job of setting things up without making it obvious what he's setting up. So like it doesn't just feel like you're reading setup, and then when it pays off, you're like, holy crap, that's what he was setting up. I think the characters aren't necessarily the most like the deepest characters ever, but I care about them, and I care what happens with them, and for how amazing of a story it is, that's enough for me. Like, I mean, if you could add on kind of more complex characters, it would move even higher up this list. So yeah, I love this series. It's one of my favorite endings to any series. Probably one of the best most like, after you read a series and go like, okay, that could not have ended any other way. That was like as close to a perfect ending. This is one of those that really hits me. I absolutely love the way it ends in Hero of Ages. This is a series that keeps going in not a direction I was expecting it to when I was reading it, but then when it went in that direction, I realized that was the direction it had to go. So, it's kind of, I'm guessing at some point it's going to get kicked off my top 10, and I'm kind of going to feel sad when it does, because me and the Mistborn trilogy have been through a lot, and it is really what got me as a primarily like fantasy reader. So, we are coming in for the number 7 spot, and we are going to a series I've read much more recently, which is Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Very, very different from the previous entry on here. This was a series I read very recently, and it was a series of, the reason it's on here is its highs are way higher than the previous 2 series. Both like my favorite 2 books in Malazan, Toll the Hounds, and Midnight Tides, I like more than... You're going to have to get pretty high on this list before you get to a book I like more than either of those. And also in each book, like the high moments are insanely good. Like Erickson's very, 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 very good at finding the right words to get an emotional reaction. Like some of the climactic endings of the books are insane. The reason Malazan isn't even higher on this list, it also has some low lows. Erickson, it's somewhat confusing to me because he can write some of my favorite characters in the genre and then write a character who I spend an entire book in their head and I still feel like I don't even know their personality at all. But the things he does amazing. He does so well. Like the way he works theme into the story. It is kind of like theme is the main point of this story. It's primarily a theme-driven series. And it's kind of the way he works theme in a story is unlike anything I've read. His writing, as I said, he's very, very good at just picking the right words to get an emotional reaction. And man, those third acts can be absolutely insane. He also has some characters I absolutely love in here, where it's kind of like, just everything they say, you're just like, makes you realize how much you love this character. And so yeah, that's why he gets a spot on this list, a series I hope to reread again in the future, because I read it for the first time pretty recently. And yeah, so here we are. And for the number 6 spot, we are moving to one of my favorite working authors, and probably the closest thing I have to an auto-buy author, and that is Codex Alera, the lesser-known series by Jim Butcher. And it's kind of funny, so I'm sure there are some, like, Malazan fans who are kind of like, oh, Codex Alera over Malazan, and I get why you'd think that, like, but whatever. I like it more. Deal with it. And it kind of gets here for opposite reasons, and that is, it doesn't quite hit the highs, but it just has, like, no lows. I guess book 1 has some parts that are kind of rough, but, you know, it's got 5 straight books that I like basically all of from cover to cover. I like basically all the characters. Jim Butcher, his strongest aspect as a writer, in my opinion, is his, like, cast of characters, like, the way, like, people interact with the side characters, and his development of people who don't have point of views. It's so good. The relationship writing and the dialogue is just, it's so well done. He's so good at capturing, like, how people talk to each other, and having the dialogue capture not just telling you things again about the person talking, but about how they specifically think of the person they're talking to. It's got some great action, some of my favorite battles I've ever read, both in terms of, like, large-scale battles and smaller-scale fights. It's paced fantastically. It's just, I really like Jim's writing style, like his prose. It gets emotional moments out of me. It's very easy to read. It's definitely not particularly dense, which, like, you know, it's not trying to be dense. It's trying to be easy to read, but it also does this while not feeling bland to me. I love this series. This is my favorite book in it. It's kind of, book 2 I like quite a bit more than book 1, and then book 3 I like quite a bit more than book 2, and then book 3 to 6 are kind of just all, like, chef's kiss. I love that stretch of books is so good, and this is just all around a series I love. I do have a why you should read video on it, and yeah, so it doesn't quite get into the top 5, but it gets the number 6 spot on this list. And sneaking right in to the number 5 spot, we have The Burning by Mr. Evan Winter. This is actually his debut novel, which is still so insane to me how he led with this. I absolutely love the crap out of this series. And I think if there was one thing I could say why Evan Winter, both his books, landed so hard for me, it's Evan Winter is very, very, very good at making me feel not just strong emotions, but, like, conflicting emotions, where it's like Tao does something, and at the same time, I'm kind of like, yeah, Tao, let's go, and also, like, holy crap, Tao, what are you doing? This is a terrible idea. And it's like neither cancels out the other, and he's also so good at building and maintaining tension, where partially because he has people fail, and so it constantly feels like things can go terribly wrong. Probably the best paced book I've ever read is The Rage of Dragons. There are a couple that would be up there, so, you know, someone could probably make a strong case for, like, Changes or Project Hail Mary, but the pacing of this book is so incredible, and it's actually a pretty impressive book to pace this well, because a lot of this book has, like, training stuff, and a lot of the time training can really drag out, but this managed to still be page-turning because things were changing, and the situation was always dynamic. It felt like every time I started to think for, like, a single page, like, I'd get to a part, and I'd be like, maybe we need a shakeup, there would then, like, the next page would have a shake-up. I think this book kept me up the latest any book has kept me up in a long time, the first time I read it. I also really like his character writing. I think, like, a lot of people say, like, yeah, he's great at action, he's great at pacing. I think he's an underrated relationship writer. What I really like about his relationship writing is that even when people are friends and you can kind of feel the small, strong bond of friendship, they have different priorities. Because even though they're, like, on the same team, they're still different people. So they can clash in serious ways because they have different priorities as people. But it's also still clear that they're, like, strong friends. And also the way he writes, like, Tao's priorities as a person and what he cares about kind of subtly changes throughout this book and throughout Fires of Vengeance as well. And I get confused. Some people seem to say, like, Tao doesn't have, like, a character arc in book 1 other than, like, training, and I'm like, do you read the same book as me? He definitely, like, his priorities from, like, change so much throughout this book and continue to evolve in Fires of Vengeance. So I love Tao as a protagonist. The world is super fresh and interesting. I'm not going to pretend it's, like, the most deep or well fleshed out world ever, but it's very distinctive and interesting. And I can't wait for more. I'm really hoping what Evan Winter does is after this quartet, he does kind of like a Joe Abercrombie First Law thing where he continues to, like, write books in this world, because we've only seen a pretty small percentage of this world and I want more. I am fully convinced that he's going to stick the landing in the next 2, and I cannot bloody wait. Also, he does so my favorite action writers all have action where it's like characters, you learn things about the character in their action, and he does that really, really well. And I absolutely love both books. It's actually insane to me that this is the first 2 books he's released. Like, if you compare this to my other favorite authors and, like, the first 2 books they released, he is well ahead of everyone else 2 books in for my favorite books. And let's move into the top 4. The top 4 were pretty set in stone. I kind of knew the top 4 instantly. Some of these I've had to work hard on, but these next 4 are, like, instantly. Actually, no, that's not true. The order of the top, I knew which books would be in the top 4. The order was kind of hard, but let's move on. And working its way into the number 4 spot, we have the Saga, the Files of one Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden, the second entry on this list for Jim Butcher, and his much more popular series, and the series I do like more, even if I read Alara first and still have Alara. So, Dresden, if you have only read like 5 or 6 Dresden books, and you're like, how the hell is Dresden this high on this list? I totally forgive you. I keep telling, like, this is the life of a Dresden fan. Well, I read Dresden before I talked in the fandom, so this didn't happen to me, but for everyone else, this is what happens. Everyone tells you, like, oh, Dresden gets so good, and you kind of read book 1, you're like, yeah, that was fun, and then you get to the later books, and you're like, holy crap, like, I was not expecting a book like this series to be this good at, like, character, and world building, and relationships, and emotional moments, and even some, like, theme. Like, where did this come from? And then you're like, yeah, welcome to our life. You're now going to have to try and convince people, try and express how amazing Dresden gets to people on book 2, and probably fail. But the Dresden Files, some of the best, one of my favorite protagonists in the entire genre. There are very, very few characters that I feel I know better than Harry Dresden, and his relationships are so incredible. Like, I just read I started rereading Skin Game again. I have a problem, okay? I have a problem. I'm a Dresden addict. I can't stop. Anyway, I read chapter 20 yesterday. For those of you who own it, I'm not going to say what happens, but you can check what it is. Like, this feels like a clinic on how to develop side characters and write character voice and write dialogue and write internal conflict and write, like, human emotion. Like, it was, like, so good. And, like, the entire series in that, it's so good at all those things. Like, the development of side characters is insane. Where you have people who have never had a point of view, who have character arcs that are rarely beaten by characters who have a ton of point of views. And all the development feels like a natural progression of where that character will go. And they're so well realized. And the relationships. And then you also get like, there's even a lot of themes that I think I've gotten from Dresden. Like, I think the version of me that didn't pick up Dresden when I did would be a worse version of myself. And I think the biggest theme of Dresden is kind of the importances of small kindnesses, and also choice. That no matter what, you can't necessarily control the thoughts that come into your head. But you can choose to not act on bad thoughts you have. And also, if you have good thoughts, and like if you're a good person who has only benign thoughts, but then you don't act on them, that's not worth anything. It's the actions that affect others in the world, and you can be a person who has bad things coming to that. And I think that's, like, I think everyone at some point will think something and then be like, why am I thinking that? Like, that's not a reasonable thing to think. But, like, you can choose not to act on things you think on, and this has been a series that I will continually reread, and I'm addicted to, and I love it so much. It has some of my favorite books. All these other series, I've held up my favorite book in the series. Skin Game is actually my third favorite book in the series, but I'm reading it now, so I'm holding it up. Anyways, that concludes my thoughts on the Dresden Files by Mr. Jim Butcher. And we have, coming in for number 3, we are into the top 3 now, we have The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and what was eventually completed by Brandon Sanderson, but mostly Robert Jordan. And this was pretty close with Dresden, but I did decide to put it 3. And The Wheel of Time, I really like Robert Jordan's writing. I know a lot of people don't like his descriptions, but I like the way he just does so many things. So let's start with world building, which is probably the thing it's the most ahead of its competitors at. Might be my favorite series ever in terms of world building. The way, like, Robert Jordan, you travel a lot in the books, but I feel like I can kind of picture and understand the culture of each location that they're only in for like a couple chapters better. Like each like individual area that you only are in for a couple chapters feels as well realized as locations that books spend the entire time in. Like, the way he does that, I'm not 100% sure how he does it, but it's so good. And Robert Jordan's characters, I love them. Well, at the beginning of the year, I wasn't sure who my favorite character writer was, and he was up there for me. Not so much for where they start. He doesn't have, like, the most insane premises for characters, and they don't stand out first, like, at page 1, but his development of characters and how they change and evolve is so next level. I would say, like, he's almost, in terms of character, like, the way he gets me invested in characters, it's like the opposite of John Gwynne. John Gwynne gets me invested right away. 3 pages into reading a character, I'm like, yeah, I'm cheering for this person. Robert Jordan does not do that. But what Robert Jordan does is the peak level of investment he hits, like, at its best, is very, very, very hard to mess with. So there are tons of characters that I'm so invested in, like, so many of the characters in these series. This is another series that has some absolutely crazy final acts. Honestly, most of my favorite series have pretty crazy final acts. I really like really crazy final acts. What can I say? But RJ has some of the craziest that I have read, and that is those are the reasons why Wheel of Time gets to number 3, just beating out Dresden. This might go back and forth, like these 3 is 3 and 4. They're very close. I like my top-end Wheel of Time books more than the Dresden Files, but I feel like when I'm not reading them, the events of Dresden Files have stuck with me a little bit more, but that's probably really unfair, because I've read Dresden a ton of times, and I've only read Wheel of Time once. So I am putting Wheel of Time in number 3, And now we get to see what I picked for number 2. And picking 2 or 1 was really, really hard. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have just told you, yeah, it's Stormlight. But it was really hard this time. Let's see what I got. Life before death. Strength before weakness. Journey before destination. Not all men are destined for greatness, I reminded him. Are you sure, Fitz? Are you sure? What good is a life lived as if it made no difference at all to the great life of the world? A sadder thing I cannot imagine. Why should not a mother say to herself, if I raise this child aright, if I love and care for her, she shall live a life that brings joy to those about her, and thus I have changed the world. Why should not the farmer that plants a seed say to his neighbor, this seed I plant today will feed someone, and that is how I change the world today. Life before death. The Radiant seeks to defend life. Always. He never kills unnecessarily, and never risks his own life for frivolous reasons. Living is harder than dying. The Radiant's duty is to live. Strength before weakness. All men are weak at some time in their lives. The Radiant protects those who are weak, and uses his strength for others. Strength does not make one capable of rule, it makes one capable of service. Journey before destination. There are always several ways to achieve a goal. Failure is preferable to winning through unjust means. Protecting 10 innocents is not worth killing 1. In the end, all men die. How you lived will be far more important to the Almighty than what you accomplished. Vengeance took no account of innocence or right. It was the chain that bound horrific events together that decreed that one awful act must beget another worse one that would lead to yet a third. It came to me, slowly, that this chain would never end. 10 spears go to battle, and 9 shatter. Did the war forge the one that remained? No. All the war did was identify the spear that would not break. The most important step a man can take. It's not the first one, is it? It's the next one. Always the next step. When people look most vicious, what you are seeing is not their animal side. It is the savagery that only humans can muster. Sometimes it seems unfair that events so old can reach forward through the years, sinking claws into one's life and twisting all that follows it. Yet perhaps that is the ultimate justice. We are the sum of all we have done, added to the sum of all that has been done to us. There is no escaping that. Not for any of us. So for those of you who are not new to my channel, you know that this came down to 2. We have the Stormlight Archives and the Realm of the Elderlings. These were so hard to compare and pick which one I had a favorite. Stormlight is only 4 books of 10. It is incomplete. I absolutely love all 4 books that are out. My least favorite Stormlight book is Oathbringer, and I think I gave it a 9.6 out of 10. Like, when I read it, it was probably my 4th favorite book of all time, and it still stayed in the top 10 for like a long time. I think right now it's like 11 or 12 or something. That being said, Realm of the Elderlings has 3 books that I like more than all the Stormlight books. Like, it has 3 10 out of 10s, compared to Stormlight, which I have 0 books at 10 out of 10. But it also has books like Dragon Keeper, and it also has a lot of books that, like, I really like, but I like way less than most of the Stormlight books. So it's kind of like, you know, my least favorite Stormlight book I gave 9.6. 9.6 would be a good book, like good Realm of the Elderlings book. But I also gave 0 Stormlight books, so this was super hard, but I have decided that my second favorite series, shocking past me, is the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. And it has been officially dethroned. It's probably been my favorite series for 6 years. I've read Way of Kings 7 times. I've read Words of Radiance 7 times. And I've only read Oathbringer a measly 4 times. This is one of those books, I like almost everything about it. Like, I could just list aspects of the book, and yeah, I like that aspects of the book. One of my favorite casts of characters in any series. Kaladin is one of my favorite protagonists. Dalinar is one of my favorite protagonists. I also love Shallan, and those are kind of the main 3. And then you go down the list of side characters, and I love all of them. Like, this is whenever someone I know is reading Stormlight, they say what part they're at, and like, no matter what part they're at, I'm like, oh, I love that part so much. It's almost like chapter by chapter, I love basically all of them for 4 straight books. The world, it's up there for one of my favorite worlds of all time. It's so unique and interesting. Also, I am a fan of hard magic. I kind of like hard and soft magic, but if I had to pick one, like, hard magic I think is harder to do, if I'm being completely honest. Like, it has more pitfalls. There's more time that I read a series with hard magic, and I'm like, yeah, you didn't quite stick the landing, compared to soft magic, but I love the way Brandon, like, intertwines magic and the mystery of the magic into his series, while also giving things that I just find cool as fuck. I'm gonna continue, like, I literally keep saying I'm not gonna reread Stormlight, and then I reread it, like, every year. And I don't know if I'm ever gonna stop, but it has been dethroned, but it was not easy to dethrone. I love all 4 of these books. All 4 are among my favorite books of all time. And it's going to be hard not to buy all the leatherbounds. When I bought Way of Kings, I said I was only going to buy Way of Kings. I don't know if that's true anymore, but we'll see. But Stormlight, I like it way more than everything below it. And it just misses out on the number 1 spot. And now I will tell you why. So every top 10 series list needs a list of honorable mentions, right? So let's start with the honorable mention. That is not an honorable mention because it was 11 and just missed out. It's because it would have been 1 if I counted it as a series, but I'm counting... That's the Live Ship Traders, but I'm counting Realm of the Elderlings as a series. So this is kind of... this book is still in there. But if Live Ship itself was a series, that would be my favorite series ever. So that's why that's an honorable mention. The actual series that was 11 was good old A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. And there are a couple things that held it back. And the number 1 is just... it's kind of not the type of fantasy story that's my favorite. But also, I've always struggled to be immersed in George R.R. Martin's writing style. Like, I read it, and I can't sit down and read A Song of Ice and Fire for, like, an hour. Like, I'll read a page or 2, and then, like, I'll get distracted. I don't get immersed the way I do when reading Hobb or Jim Butcher or Stormlight or a lot of other books. But I think, like... despite it not being my favorite type of series, and not getting immersed in the writing style, it's just really, really well executed. Like, he's one of the best character writers. He has very, I think, complex characters, great dialogue, really good world building, where he kind of takes... his favorite type of world building is taking inspiration from history and changing things, and big fan of that. Another series that... kind of I consider was Dune. I've only read book 1 of Dune, so this didn't really not make it from a quality standpoint, but this, like, Dune, to me, it feels like book 1 is a standalone, and then there's a series after. I know book 1 isn't a standalone, but I'm thinking of it in my head right now as a standalone, so it's hard for me to think of where I would put Dune as a series. If if I end up liking the other stuff, this Dune could in the future make it into the top 10. And then a book I'm reading right now, which is The Blackest Heart by Brian Lee Durfee. This series could squeak its way in the top 10. I know The Lonesome Crown is going to come out, and The Blackest Heart I'm really liking, even better than The Forgetting Moon. If The Lonesome Crown is similar or even better than this, it could squeak its way into 10 in the future. And then there's kind of a weird honorable mention I want to give, and that's, this one it was not close to being 11, but I think if, like, I know the author has potential to get this back, and that is The Gentleman Bastards, because I love The Lies of Locke Lamora. It's one of my favorite first books in a series. And then Republic of Thieves I thought was very good, and then Red Seas Under Red Skies I really liked, but not as much as most of the books that have been on this top 10. And then Republic of Thieves I thought was fine. If Thorn of Ember Lane is fire, and Scott Lynch kind of gets back to writing books I like this much, he could work his way back into the top 10, because he's good enough at writing that he can write books better than the ones on the top 10. So he could in the future, like by the time the series is done, he has enough potential as a writer, and I like his writing and his character work and his dialogue and his relationships enough that he could in the future work his way back in, but he does have an uphill battle. That is the end of the honorable mentions. So let's finish up this list. And my favorite series of all time is, of course, Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So why is this my favorite series of all time? Well, there's a lot of factors that brought it up to like tied with Stormlight. The actual thing that I decided was the tiebreaker is Stormlight isn't done. And not only is Stormlight not done, by comparison, Realm of the Elderlings has the best ending that I have ever read to any series, straight up. But the reason it gets up there is Robin Hobb is easily my pick for my favorite character writer in the genre. And it's funny how not close it is. Like, there's a bunch of people who I have kind of like somewhat close together who it's like, you know, they have some characters I absolutely love. They also have some characters I'm not a huge fan of. Where it's like, you know, if you asked me before I read the rest of Realm of the Elderlings, there were like 5 names that I would rotate between giving. But no, Hobb is easily my favorite character writer. I'm the most invested in them. I feel like I understand them the most. They feel the most human. They have some of the most distinct voices. Their character development is so great and so natural. It's out of this world. And then she's still good at the other stuff. She's also probably like tied for my favorite prose writer. It's her or Guy Gavriel Kay. I don't know. Pick one. I kind of rotate in my head. I'm not sure. But her prose is so elegant. You will not find an awkward line. She knows when to keep like beauty and simplicity. And it's so, like, it's not super dense, and yet it's still, like, gorgeous. And, like, you'll read something and just, like, appreciate the way she wrote it. Like, I literally just opened the page, and the first line is, "There are so many songs about sailing off the edge of the world." Huh. I have no idea the context of that. But I'm sure that chapter was great, because this is Assassin's Fate. My favorite book ever. And I also like the way she works theme into her books. It's my preferred style. It's kind of the same way most of my other favorite series are, where theme is not the primary point of the story. The main point is about the characters and the actual story, and the theme comes from that, you know, a well-told story is probably going to have themes in it if it has, like, you know, an amount of depth to it. And it's kind of, they're there, and there's things you can learn about humanity, and just things you can learn in general, but you're also not beaten over the head with them. Like, the theme is there, and it's some of the best theming I've read, but it's also not the primary point, and I love the way that's done. Even her world building ends up being really fantastic. I was somewhat critical of her world building after Farseer. Like, I think the world building is just kind of there in the background at first, but that's something she improves at again and again, and it's just, my 3 favorite books of all time are all written by Robin Hobb. So, I like these 3 books, Ship of Magic, Assassin's Fate, and Fool's Errand, more than any other book. So, when my top 3 favorite books all come from the same series, that's a pretty convincing case. So, anyway, this concludes my top 10 favorite series of all time. Let me know what you think. Have a nice day, everyone.